What's up, homies? What's up, homies? What's up, homies? Welcome to the Knowledgeable Homeowner Podcast. We pick the brains of industry pros to unlock the trade secrets of homeownership. Our mission is simple: to turn everyday people into knowledgeable homeowners. What's up, homies? Welcome back to the Knowledgeable Homeowner Podcast. I'm Sturdy Joe. Today, here with me, we got Tyler Barron of Foundation Crack Repair, foundation repair company contractor.
Yeah,
right?
Mixed with waterproofing.
Waterproofing. All right, great, man. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate you coming on. Why don't you take a second, tell the people who you are, your background, how you got into construction?
Sure. So my name's Tyler Barron. I grew up in Bayport. Our business is on Main Street in Patchogue. We basically have a mixture of home service companies. We started in construction. We still own Reliable Home Remodeling, which focuses on interior renovation. Naturally with that, we do a lot of finished basement renovations. That's how the foundation company started. When we go to finished basements, that's typically, 50% of the time when we get calls about foundation cracks, issues, water leaks. The other 50% typically comes from home inspectors like Joe. Anytime people go to sell a house. It's just something that we were so commonly running into that we kind of started our own business to fix the issues since it was coming up so often. And over the past about 4 years with this company, it's evolved into two completely separate companies. Manufacture a lot of our own products. We try to be very unique and different to all the other competitors that are out there. And I think we got a very good topic with some of the common things that we see every single day.
Yeah.
On the
Yeah, definitely.
out in the world doing estimates with what other people are doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, foundation is such a big buzzword. Like, I do a home inspection, and there could be $80,000 worth of problems in the rest of the house, and for some reason, just because people don't know, is like, is the foundation good? How's the foundation? Is the foundation good? So there's a huge buzzword there, which creates a lot of anxiety. It's very easy for people to kind of get taken advantage of, which I know is something that we've brought up before too. But I want to circle back to you talk about you have Reliable Home Remodeling, and then Foundation Crack Repair. So Reliable was there first.
Reliable was there first.
And you're going into doing, like you said, you're doing a finished basement. You open up a wall and you see foundation damage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whether it be they're looking to finish the basement, they've known about it and they haven't cared because it's not a finished basement. It doesn't really affect anything. Yeah. They just bought the house. They're looking to sell the house, whatever other reason it comes up.
Yeah.
But basically, it's just such a common problem on Long Island, and it happens, I'm sure, on what percentage of your home inspections do you find something?
There's almost always something. Like, we're over, you're from Bayport, so we're right in line in Islip. These houses built, some of them were built in the 1800s, but you even get the houses built in the 50s and 60s. We're building on top of sand. There's no piles. There's nothing down in the ground. There's not the footings are probably undersized. They built the foundations the way they would in the middle of Long Island, and we're seeing foundation problems. So, but that's cool that you bring up the story arc there, pretty much, where you had the remodeling company. You guys would go in a basement, and then you'd see the point where we need to fix it. That's what got you guys into fixing it. And what I'm assuming is that because you figured you can do it better, or you could see it being done the right way. You saw the need for it.
Sure. So it kind of started off with almost like you said, you see it on almost every single home inspection that you do, and it's the same thing with almost every single basement that we go to finish. There's some type of crack or leak or whatever it happens to be, and that's when they actually care to fix it.
Of course, yeah.
Prior to that, most people don't care.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of us running into it so often and it becoming an issue where we have to try to call different people in and get different opinions, and it starts to delay us. And then the other aspect of that is when we do start calling people in and we're getting different quotes. We're getting quotes all over the map, all sorts of different things. A lot of stuff that I don't really just agree with at that time, just having the construction background.
Agree with the cost, or agree with their approach to fixing the problem?
The approach to fixing the problem. Yeah. So I would say it's a very niche business when it comes to waterproofing and foundation repair. And within that realm, there's really on Long Island about 5 companies that really do it. So on Long Island,
relevant to our market, would you say like a foundation, we're not talking new foundations really, we're talking foundation repair and waterproofing. Those are kind of hand in hand. So if I see a company that's Joe's waterproofing or Joe's foundation repair, they're both doing similar stuff.
For the most part.
Because the problems kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. So not always, but for the most part. A lot of companies will only do interior stuff or will only do exterior stuff or vice versa. And, that's like for that reason when we go to get estimates for the same problem with 4 different companies, there's really now only like 5 of us on Long Island even do this. We're getting repairs that are outside, inside, and price ranges all over the map. And that's kind of like what got us into at least looking to, to start to fix them so for ourselves, initially just to not have our timelines get, messed up when we go to finish a basement and it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Plus, it's nice to keep everything in-house as well. But that's kind of how it all came about. Now, I want to go back to a point you said a couple seconds ago, or
Sure.
About a minute ago, with the soil, sand down by the water here in Islip and Bayport. So, like, Long Island's got 2 kind of complete opposites, and we get the same type of issues for 2 different reasons. So, South Shore, we have sand. The thing that's great with sand, water drains very well. So on all of the houses that I'm sure you point this out too on the home inspections, average house is like 60s on Long Island. All of the downspouts that come off the roof to the gutters, they just dump on the ground. There's no drainage systems or anything. If you're on the South Shore and it's in a sandy area, it's not causing too much of like a water issue. It's draining into the ground, whether it finds its way into the basement or not.
Yeah.
But built on sand, naturally you're going to have more sinking and settling, and that's where a lot of the foundation cracks come from. Whereas the North Shore is the kind of opposite problem, but it causes the same issues. So North Shore, we have rocky clay. All the beaches are rock. Soil is clay. If you can imagine building on that, you get a lot more solid foundations, a lot more sinking, settling issues, or a lot less sinking and settling issues because you're built on more solid ground. But you have terrible drainage. Because it doesn't drain through silt and clay.
To really oversimplify, to drive it home that somebody might not get it, you're saying the foundation, the basement wall, the concrete walls, and the floor that is underneath the house. It's underground and it's surrounded by soil.
Yep,
so in the South Shore, we'll have sand around it, which we could think of sand as it's loose and water flows through it. On the North Shore, you said rocky clay.
Yep.
Right, and we actually had a landscape architect or a landscape engineer talk about clay in a different episode, and that's cool because I'm learning more about that now too. So the clay is harder for the water to get through, right?
Basically.
It won't just sink down to the ground. It could force the water towards the foundation. Is that kind of the problem?
It goes from sand, silt, clay in the size of like microns of how the material is. The more you get towards clay, the less it drains into the ground easier. And with that issue, you are built on more solid ground as far as the foundation is sinking and settling than sand. But water is not draining into the ground. So a thing that we see very, very common, which is probably 50% of the calls that we end up getting, is the downspouts that come off of the roof. People think it leaked through the foundation, a crack, up from the ground, whatever it happens to be. And very, very, very often, the downspouts are just running into a window well, filling up the window well, coming down the wall,
it's got nowhere else to go.
Finding a puddle in the basement. Yeah. These people are not living in the basement. They come down, they see a puddle. They don't know where it came from. And that's like a very, 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 very common problem that we see is just window wells filling up with water from downspouts not going into the ground.
Okay, so you were talking about the different soils, and you brought up before the different solutions or the different approaches to correcting problems, and you said inside and outside.
Sure.
So are there scenarios where you would make repairs from the inside? Are there scenarios where you'd make repairs from the outside? Or were you saying that you only do one or the other, or you prefer one or the other?
Sure. So what I was mentioning before, at least, is there's majority of companies do one or the other. A lot of companies like to do things just from the inside. They don't have to worry about excavation, messing up the properties, liability.
What's an inside repair for, you're saying for water intrusion, right?
For anything.
Or even crack
foundation,
repair?
crack repair, sinking, settling, water issues.
What would inside repairs be on that?
Sure. So, and this is one of the very, very key points that I think we both wanted to get to, is the key term French drain. You hear it every single day.
Yeah.
No one understands exactly what it is or how it works, so I want to explain that in a minute.
I'm laughing because all I can hear is every dad ever be like, is there a French drain down there? It's like there's some kind of European thing going on. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Could be French.
Nobody really understands how they work and why they do or don't need them. I'll get into that in a second, but out of everything that we do, at least from competitors, it's the most common oversold thing you don't need.
Yeah, it seems like a Band-Aid solution in most situations.
It's not a Band-Aid. So it a lot depends on what the problem is.
Yeah.
we'll get to that as far as like different reasons why you may or may not need one.
So just again, to step back to oversimplify, when you hear the term French drain system, or I have a French drain, or is there a French drain in a basement, like what does that mean for the people who don't know?
Sure. So I'll explain exactly what a French drain is, and then I'll go back into the other thing. So basically, a French drain has one sole purpose. Sometimes they're used for other things, but really the main purpose of a French drain is to control the water table underneath the foundation. So naturally on Long Island, or really anywhere in the United States, but specifically on Long Island because we are an island, there's water underneath everything. So anywhere you go, this area in East Islip, on average, you get about 8 to 16 feet before you hit the water table. If you go to Sound Avenue and Riverhead, you can be 180 feet above sea level. Yeah. You could dig 180 feet before you hit the groundwater. Yeah. There's some exceptions with like unique underground streams and weird stuff like that.
Right here, we're like 4 feet to water.
Okay.
You go into my back because that's a swamp back there. That's Seatuck Preserve.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a foot and a half.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like you put a shovel in the ground and water is filling up.
Yep.
But we are one of those unique. It's a wetland over here. It's all flood zone and whatnot.
Wetlands is one thing. Another thing is just underground streams, which are in a lot of areas in Long Island, which is weird and unique. Like,
and it could be in the middle of Long Island, and you can have, and then I feel like people will refer to them as like aquifers. I have like an aquifer or running under my house. That's when we get those weird patches of high water table in an inland area where you might not expect it.
It is uncommon.
Yeah.
It's not common at all, but every so often we run into it. But as a general rule of thumb, anywhere on Long Island, if you start digging a hole, you're going to hit water. Mm-hmm. And for anyone that's been on Long Island for a long period of time, 5, 10, 20 years plus, every single beach that's on the South Shore is significantly shorter than it used to be, and the water's rising. So there's a lot of issues of houses that have never had an issue that are starting to get issues now, and the water that's underneath everything is starting to rise.
Yeah.
So a lot of houses that have been fine for the past 20, 30, 40 years are starting to get issues now because the water table keeps rising. Mm-hmm. But back to like exactly a French drain and how it works. That's the problem of what it's trying to fix is water that's subsurface rising from underneath.
Yep.
And once it gets to the height of the basement
because
slab or higher,
a French drain, from my understanding, is a pump that is water is brought to it through drainage pipe under the slab or in the slab from the perimeter of the basement. So that's where it's dealing with an under slab issue of there's too much water in the soil under the slab. So we have to collect that water, bring it to a pump, and get it out of there.
Yep.
And that's where a French drain is appropriate, is high water table, hydrostatic pressure, groundwater problem that we cannot avoid. Unless we raise the house up and fill the basement, we're always going to have water under the slab. So French drains remove water that's coming in from below the ground.
Exactly. Okay. It's actually coming up through the floor. And if you go to South Shore areas, there's a lot of houses that will flood on and off without rain, just from the water table rising.
High tide, low tide.
Low tide.
Yeah.
Rain does add to it, but that's the only time that like you truly need a French drain, and there is no other option because you could waterproof, patch, paint, do whatever you want. If it's gonna rise up, it's going to come through the floor.
The nice thing, home inspection wise, is like you grew up in Bayport, right?
Yeah.
You said, and like if you don't buy in Bayport, I'm sure like most of your friends, or at some point, you're all gonna want to come back to Bayport.
Sure.
So same thing with like Islip, right? Or I do a lot of Bright Waters, Islip, East Islip. So most people who moving here have lived here, and they're already okay with the fact that there's water in our crawl spaces, there's water in our basement. So I don't have to explain it too much. It's normally like, oh, it's actually not that bad. I thought it would be worse. So I don't typically have to explain to them like we get damp basements, but sometimes people are moving from somewhere else and I'm like, you got to swallow this pill. We're really close to the water and like it's coming in from the ground. So, all right. So when you were saying with French drains solve that problem, but you find in your experience that they're being installed in scenarios where it's not a groundwater issue, it's possibly different water intrusion.
So like that's the most commonly sold, product or item where it's not needed. Like I said, if you don't have a water table issue, if you could cut a hole in the slab and dig 3-4 feet deep and you never hit water, it's completely useless and it will never work. It's not going to do anything. It might solve issues like, a lot of people will do a French drain system, and then if there is a crack in the foundation while it's leaking, they'll put a membrane up the wall so that when it does come in,
it goes to the
ends
French
up in
drain.
the system.
Yeah,
so it will work for that, but
instead
it's not
of
the intended
stopping
purpose.
the water from coming in through the wall, that's where I say Band-Aid fix is that we're just putting a system in that's not stopping the problem, it's just taking the water out. And you're spending good money on not only installing it, you do pay money to have the pump run. There's maintenance to the pump, and you got to replace it every so often.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, you're still letting water get in, so it's not solving the problem.
Yeah. So like that's the unfortunate thing where I see homeowners that get taken advantage of all the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, like, probably well over 100, where we go to an estimate. They've had the other 3 or 4 people we run into every single day there for another estimate. And, a majority of their quotes end up being for a French drain. And it's very, very clear and obvious that the downspouts funneling right into the window.
Yeah, exactly.
It's flooding into the basement.
Yeah.
We can, do simple stuff like extend the downspout, put in the drywall, pitch the gutter the other direction so it's dumping the water somewhere where there's not, a window.
Allow it to flow away. Don't fight the water. Allow it to flow in a different direction. Yeah.
Basically. So like there's a lot of super simple and cheap scenarios where you can divert the drainage and stop that issue. I mean, I've even done projects where, we go out to an estimate. That's what the problem is. 2 months or so later, we end up getting, following up. They ended up hiring another company that did a French drain system. We could drive by the house and see at the same time they extended the downspout. And that's what really is solving the problem from water being in the basement. They just want to sell the highest ticket item you can, which is
Ace Hardware and 30 seconds to I had a client reach out. He was on the North Shore, and I think it might have been made worse by what you're talking about with the soil, because he had like a Fugazi gutter leader that was going underneath the deck so it would deposit the rainwater away from somewhere else. And at the time of the inspection, it had like a belly in it. So, it was a defect in the report, like this is smacked together. There was a basement window right there, like whatever it was. It was like the perfect scenario for things to go wrong. So he lived in the house for some time and everything was fine. And then he ended up getting his gutters cleaned. And I think when it was like a local handyman, I think when he cleaned the gutters, like he just threw the hose in there and he let the debris run through the system. And I think the debris got caught in that drainage pipe. So his basement out of nowhere during heavy rainfall would start flooding bad. And it turned out it was because that pipe got clogged.
Yeah.
And went in there. And he was able to remediate all the problems without getting taken advantage of. But in my mind, like if I didn't point that out to him, it would have been so easy for somebody to come in and be like, you have this serious basement waterproofing problem. Where he didn't really have a basement waterproofing problem. He just had a gutter that was dumping gallons of water right next to an unwaterproofed foundation. Sure. So it's like, if you just don't know to look for these things, you trust people to come in and tell you the right thing. And it's, unfortunately, Long Island's an expensive place to live. So people got to make as much money as possible.
For sure.
And now a word from our sponsor, the Ryan Anthony Head Start Fund. This foundation is focused on providing alternative career paths for young people other than just college. If you want to learn more about what they got going on and some updates, you can check them out at lookwhomadeit.org. Now back to the show.
And another, 2 different things that piggyback directly off of that. With the downspouts that do dump right next to the corner with the little turn, and that's it.
Yeah.
Extending it 3 or 4 feet with like the flexible, connection pipe that you could get at Home Depot or a hardware store, it's really not enough. It doesn't really do anything. Even if you get it 3, 4, 5 feet away, it just soaks into the ground and comes right back. So you really should have either dry wells or just a pipe that goes underground, 15, 20 feet away, where it pops up on one of those green surface caps, pop in the emitter, and just disperses the water
in a different spot.
Further away.
Yeah,
as long as it's further away, that's all that really matters.
Yeah.
Another thing that's like a super common misconception is grading matters a lot less than everybody thinks. Unless it's a solid surface, like a driveway, a patio, a pool that's shedding all the water to the structure. If you have a minor, grade or a hill that's going towards the house, it's not shedding the water and hitting the house. It all soaks into the ground.
Yeah.
So it's
when
very
we had
commonly...
the landscape engineer talking about it, it was a similar topic he said too, is he was like, we worry too much about the surface grading and less about the substrate, where you could have 3 feet of topsoil and then underneath it is clay, and the clay's back pitched towards the house. So the grass looks great, but the clay's pitched towards the house because they filled it and they didn't think about the clay when they filled it. So that's a really interesting thing, is that we might be focusing too much on one problem and not really looking at the other issues.
Definitely a lot of focus on grading when it really doesn't make that much of a difference.
Okay, so we're getting into water intrusion and we're getting into foundation cracks. You repair both. Do you find on a lot of jobs that you run into both? Like when you start investigating a water intrusion problem, are you then finding cracks in the foundation that are letting the water get in? Or is it kind of, it's spotty, like, some jobs you do, some jobs you don't?
Sure. It's Kind of a mixture. I would have to say, like, when we get a call that says I have water in my basement from a heavy rain, and that's the information that we get, 75% of the time it's the downspout filling up the window well. From there, most of the time, if it's a crack that's leaking, they'll just say there's a crack that's leaking because it's relatively obvious. Yeah. If it's not a finished basement.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like water intrusion and leaking, it's always a mixture of a couple things. It's either coming in through windows, very rarely, but it can be coming through the actual surface of the wall. That's what like the white chalkiness is. It's called efflorescence, just showing excessive moisture.
Yep.
And then water table issues where it's rising from underneath. But very, very, very often is, it all kind of stems back to the downspouts, even any of the cracks and stuff. They're always, wherever the downspout is, within 8 to 10 feet of that is typically where it cracks off the corner of a window or something.
Especially over here with that sandy soil, because the soil underneath the footing is getting eroded, and it's shifty anyway. It moves on its own anyway. So,
Like another way that I try to explain it, just to simplify to homeowners in person on site, is no one really realizes how much water actually comes off the roof. So like an exact figure is for 1,000 square feet of roofing, and typical house, a 2,200 square foot ranch, let's say, is like a 2.5 square. I mean, it's like 25 square. 2,500 square foot roof, give take somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So for 1,000 square feet of roofing, you get 623 gallons of water that comes off the roof in 1 inch of rain. So this past year we've had, Yeah. So, not the time frame doesn't matter. Just 623 gallons of water per 1 inch of rain.
Oh, per inch of rain. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So if we get a 2, 3, 4 inch rainstorm,
it could be even more.
600 gallons, 623 gallons times
and
however many inches of rain.
Per 10 squares.
Per 10 squares.
An average house roof is like 2,500 square feet. So you have thousands of gallons in a heavy rainstorm. Thousands of gallons.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's almost like in a really heavy rain, depending on the size of the roof, the size of how much gutter, is taking water. The best way to put it is like tape a garden hose to the corner of each, corner of the foundation, and then every single time it rains for 60 years, turn them on for 8 hours. Yeah. And then expect to not have sinking, settling, cracks, water issues. It's when you put it into that perspective, it shows why we have problems on every single house.
100%, and it's such a common thing that comes into houses that I'm going to say there is a crack comment on probably 80 to 90% of my home inspection reports of some degree, because you know what happens to as a home inspector, and this isn't to like cover my ass for liability wise. There's nothing worse than like seeing something extremely minor that doesn't even warrant a conversation, and their uncle comes over 6 months down the line and is like, nobody told you about this? And he even knows nobody cares about it. But so sometimes I throw stuff in there where it's just like, I tell them to monitor it. So even if it's one of those, I'll still throw like very, very minor hairline cracks, and I'll say, vertical crack, monitor it, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
I tell them to seal it from the outside.
Yep.
So it's something to almost be expected with these older homes in the sandy soil. You come in and you do the repairs on those cracks.
Yeah.
At what point do you think a homeowner should be concerned about a crack? What are the red flags for you to where it actually requires correction?
So it's going to vary on whether it's a cinder block foundation, a poured wall, something else, the size of the crack. A huge determining factor on what we end up doing as a solution, whether it be like a good, better, best type of repair, is whether it's a crawl space, a finished basement, an unfinished basement, if they plan to finish the basement, if they just bought or they're selling the house. There's a lot of factors that go into it. We'll start from like bare minimum and work your way up. So like, a good idea for new homeowners that have just bought a house and are worried about, a smaller crack that maybe comes up in your report, but have the kitchen, the bathrooms, painting, all other stuff to get to. They're not finishing the basement.
Yeah.
And it's not something that they have the money for right now.
Yeah.
Super simple tip, go to Home Depot or hardware store and just get like either a pre-mixed or a powder of like hydraulic cement. This is not going to fix anything, really do anything. The only purpose is monitoring. So if you do have a crack, if you like spackle it basically and sponge it clean, so you fill it and now the surface doesn't show the crack, you can see where it is.
Yeah.
You're starting from a baseline again. So
That's
now
awesome.
Over the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, if it starts to open,
That's
that...
an awesome tip. Because that is what the conversation I'm having with them is like, listen, we don't know how long this crack has been here and how long it's looked like this.
Yeah.
another reason I throw every crack in the report is to have the picture of it. So so at least they can go back and look at it, but throwing the hydraulic cement, because hydraulic cement is a patching cement that you can use. It's can keep water up, but it's still cement.
It's not doing anything.
It's not doing anything.
It's not fixing the leak. It's not fixing the crack. But if you put it in and sponge all the excess off, so it's nice and flat and clean, it gives you a baseline. Yeah. Because if the crack goes from a 1/16 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch over 2 years, you'll never know if you didn't do that and 100%. Have a baseline.
Yeah, because you're not. Yeah, you can't tell that movement until you. So coating it, doing a nice clean job, and that's something any homeowner can do. Follow the instructions on the hydraulic cement on the box. Yep. You got to work fast with it because it dries pretty quick. But yeah, just put it on there, sponge it nice and smooth, and now you have your baseline. And now they can start to monitor it. Because, and what is the reason of that? Is to see if it's growing.
Yeah, so anyone's concerned, if I were to come to an estimate and tell you that the crack's probably been there for 25 years, it's never going to get any worse. If it's not leaking, most people are just going to leave it.
Yeah.
If they at least do that on their own as a bare minimum to have a baseline, at least they'll know as they live there if it is or isn't getting worse. Because if you don't, it's very hard to tell visually. And when you see it, once a week for 2 years, that it has changed a little.
Yeah. And then you'll do the thing where you second guess yourself. Then you'll actually look at it and be like, has it always been this big? Is it getting? And then that's when they panic, and that's when they call a company and they can get taken advantage of because they don't even know what their condition is.
Sure.
Because there might have been a situation where the gutter 20 years ago was depositing near the footing, and the footing got eroded, and then we corrected the situation, and the crack isn't growing because the foundation is no longer moving. The crack growing is a sign that the foundation is moving in some way, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And all right, so then, because this is a conversation that I bring up a lot too, is that a crack is a condition. The foundation movement is a condition. Why are we concerned with that? Why is that something scary? Why is it something sometimes people have to pay money for? What is the repercussion of a moving, growing crack?
Sure. So if it is growing, it is getting worse. It depends: vertical, horizontal, poured wall, block wall. Common with block walls is bowing in.
Yep.
There's we basically call it stage 1, 2, or 3 of how much deflection it has bowing in. And I've had, probably 15 or so where it's gotten to the point so far that it actually collapses in, or to repair it, we collapse it in and replace the entire wall.
So you're talking about a masonry block, so people call it a cinder block, a concrete block where you look at the wall and it looks like stacked Legos. You don't have poured concrete. You have a block foundation where you can see each block, and you'll have a horizontal crack. And most of the time, it's 2 or 3 feet below the top of the foundation wall, right? Yeah. It's in line with the frost line just about,
exactly.
Right?
In line with ground level. The top that's above grade is typically going to stay. It's bolted into the sill plate. The bottom's on the footing. So right where you get, whether it be from frost heaving, traffic back and forth with next to a driveway.
That weight, because the weight of a car in the soil is going to push against the foundation.
Over years and years, you get pressure against the wall that starts to bow the wall.
And you said something to explain to people. You said the frost heave situation.
Sure.
So to oversimplify it is pretty much water gets accumulated next to a small gap of the foundation. It freezes, it pushes on the foundation, makes the gap bigger. More water gets in, more freezing, more pushing. That's the frost heave cycle, which is why, again, what you were talking about with the gutter leader extension situation is even more important, especially when you have a block foundation, because of that frost heave scenario.
Exactly. You're dumping all the water right next to the foundation, and it's the same as freezing a can, and when it freezes, it bursts because it expands.
Yep, yeah. And you do that again over 60 years, it will push the block wall in. And now, so what you're saying is it's all conditional. Some cracks are much more serious than others.
Sure.
So if a homeowner has a masonry block wall and they're starting to see that crack growing, because we'll see it in an infancy stage where it's 1/8 of an inch, but it is going straight across, where we know it's starting to happen.
Yeah.
If somebody sees that in their house, does that immediately require correction? Is it something they could monitor? Is there things they can do to stop the heave from happening?
Sure. So I would say, depending on their scenario, the budget, if it's planned on being finished or not, they could, same as any other crack, they could use the hydraulic cement to monitor it, or the best solution, of course, is to fix it from the beginning so it doesn't get worse, because most of the repairs we do for that type of stuff is carbon fiber, basically strap product. We manufacture.
And that's what you manufacture.
Correct. Yeah.
And so where does that go?
So it goes from the top sill plate, right at the very top of the foundation, to the bottom slab, and just basically lays over the surface of the of the wall.
And is it rigid or is it like a
starts
strong
as,
strap?
Starts as a fabric,
Okay.
but it gets like an epoxy resin that adheres it to the foundation wall. Once it's adhered to the wall, it's rigid. It doesn't go anywhere. It's
Gotcha.
flat to the wall.
Yeah.
And the whole point is, if there's a crack halfway through the wall and the strap is adhered to it, the tensile strength of it is insane.
Yeah.
So for
absolutely.
it to for it to bow in, it would have to break the strap.
And it's not doing that. Yeah,
And
the
it's not
frost
doing
heave isn't that strong. It's just that a masonry block wall that was built 60 years ago. There's really no tensile strength.
Basically.
it's all compressive strength. It's meant
Exactly.
to hold the weight of the house. It's not meant to take a load this way. So you add those straps to pretty much reinforce it like you would now from the inside. So that's an interior correction that is probably rather practical.
Definitely.
Right? It's not. They're not excavating up half the
No,
yard.
it's much easier, quicker, cleaner,
So
simpler.
that's a solution for the horizontal crack.
Correct.
In a masonry block wall. And now, what about the worst crack that I've ever seen was in West Islip, and it was about 2 inches open at the top, and it was also offset an inch.
Sure.
And now that was the corner footing had to be just sinking into the ground.
Definitely.
What is a solution for something like that? What are we really going to be able to do with that?
Yep. So that was a poured wall, right?
Yeah.
So with that scenario,
I believe 70s, built in the 70s.
Okay. So poured wall, it opened like that. So the top being open larger than the bottom tells me 100% chance there's a downspout on the corner and that wall sunk and it opened at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal is basically, one of three different things. I can excavate from the inside or the outside. And it depends on how far gone it is. If it's really, 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 really far, it might be better to actually replace the wall. Depends also on how much it affected the structure above. If the floors are all uneven.
Because we touched on that, and I'm glad we brought that back, is because the problem with a crack sitting by itself, the worst the crack is going to do is it could possibly let water get in. The crack isn't the scary thing. It's the repercussions of what the crack is telling us. So the foundation's moving, your framing sits on the foundation wall that's now moving. It's going to cause your walls to go out of plumb, your floors to become unlevel. In some scenarios, which we see a lot, doors are crooked, windows don't open. And in that house, I mean, when you looked at the girder going, east-west, it was bent down so much because the foundation, the whole floor system, everything was pulling in that direction that you could actually see the girder was dive bombing to where it met the beam pocket in the wall. It was crazy. So that house had visual repercussions. The floors were opening, the walls were cracked, the windows were crooked.
Exactly.
So with that, it was so bad that I ask these questions because I want to teach the people, but I have a good understanding of how these things work. That it was so bad, I don't even know what you would do, and I'm assuming maybe in that scenario they might have done what you said, where we're might possibly be repouring it.
Sure. So there would be three things that I would do on that, based off of seeing it in person, of course.
Yeah.
So, option one, which is the most extreme, is actually replace the wall.
Yeah.
A lot of the times you get away without doing that.
Yeah.
So from there, really two things. You can excavate underneath that section of the wall in sections and underpin it, which basically what underpinning is you just, so a typical house foundation is an 8-inch foundation wall with a 16-inch footing. We're going to excavate underneath the footing, which is at the very bottom of the wall where it meets the slab that you stand on in the basement, and basically pour a larger footing with more surface area. It's like trying to push a pencil versus a marker into the ground. The more surface area you have, the harder it's going to be to sink. So you basically just pour a new footing that's wider, super overkill on something like that, where it's not going to continue to sink. And now once we have it where it's not going to continue to sink, you can fix the actual cracks with some carbon fiber products that we manufacture. We'll get into that later. And you now at that point, you've held it where it is, and we know it's not going to get worse. And then if it did affect floors upstairs, stuff like that, you can then take up floors, reframe, level it out. If it's a slab, you could pour self-leveler and make it flat again, and then visually you won't notice anything happen.
Yeah, so we're not jacking the foundation back up to get it back to zero. We're going to do repairs inside to get the floors nice and level again and everything.
Sure. So you could do that as well. So there's those. That's the third. So there's repouring the entire wall, which is the extreme. There's underpinning it, supporting it, so we know it's not going to get worse. And then if it affected the house, you could fix the actual, the floor or whatever it happens to be. The third is helical piles, push piers, stuff like that.
Do you guys do helical piles?
We do.
I like helical piles. I think they're really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So it's depending on the scenario, like with what you're explaining, it would definitely work.
Yeah.
It's basically up against the foundation wall on the outside of the house. We use an excavator that basically puts a big screw into the ground. And based off of how hard it is on like a PSI factor to drill the screw into the ground is once we know we've hit bedrock or solid ground where we can push against that.
So how much resistance you get driving the pile in, the
Correct.
Screw in,
Yeah.
that's when you know you've made it.
Once we get to a solid enough point.
Where the foundation is, looking at it up and down, where does do you get the pile directly below the fitting? Like how do you...
To the left.
To the left.
So when you get the foundation wall, I'm going to excavate the outside.
Yep.
The helical pile drills next to it vertically. Then I have a steel post basically sticking up from the helical pile once it's solid. Attached to that gets a push pier or that basically would go underneath
to offset
footing.
the hold. Yeah, to hold it offset.
Yep, and that gets underneath.
I've never
footing.
seen the pile process like for a repair. So I always wondered that. I was like, how do they get it to work? Okay, so it's intentionally offset, and then we have equipment that allows it to transfer the load.
Yep.
Stepped over to the right.
Yeah,
once
you have, because you're working in dirt, once you have the helical pile screwed in and solid, it's the same aspect of putting a car jack under a car and lifting it up. You have dirt, so once you hit solid ground, you're basically putting a hydraulic jack under that area and lifting up that section of the house. You could actually close the crack back up and put it back to where it used to be.
Oh, so you can lift it. You can position it because the helical pile is in there so firm that we can apply as much pressure as we want. It's not moving. Wow, I love that.
That's super cool.
Yeah, like that's something that I'd love. If you have one of those projects coming up, like I'd love to see that in person.
Definitely.
We could record that because I think the helical pile thing is amazing. My neighbor next door, the house is 150 years old. He added a second story, and he's a great dude. And I told him, I was like, bro, before you do anything, like please make sure your foundation is good. Obviously, the architects were in on that, but he added a ton of helical piles in there. Now that thing ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, so they do it also like aside from just like a repair aspect like that, they do it on new construction houses by the water.
Yeah. Also, though, and I just want to say, obviously there's cost to it, but for when he told me how much he paid for it, for a structural repair to stop this house from sinking into the ground, I was very surprised about how, like, I wouldn't say affordable, but it is affordable. Like, it was a no-brainer for him to add that to his project. Like, if for some reason he was doing it unpermitted and nobody told him to do it, it was so worth it knowing that house isn't going to go anywhere anymore. And it's not a huge house, not a huge footprint, but he resecured a ton of helical piles, and it wasn't an outlandish number. I thought it would have been way more. When he told me it, I was like, dude, bring it here. Let's just do it here.
Depending on what the project is, it does get expensive.
Yeah. Well, some of these houses have 100 piles. His had like 17.
Sure.
Something. Yeah.
So, but I mean, in reference to the value of the house, like, it's not comparable. Like another thing that we, I don't want to say we specifically specialize in, but we've kind of come to become, the like Long Island staple of taking care of this when it comes to mortgage companies. We work with a lot of them, and whenever, I don't know if you've ever come across this. Have you ever came to a house where there is major structural issues, like that crack? They get an accepted offer, they get to closing, and the house, once a mortgage company gets involved, is not mortgageable. Have you ever ran into that before?
So I don't get involved in that second step process.
Sure.
But like that crack, the buyer didn't go through with it.
Okay.
But if any appraiser walked through the house, there was no way they weren't going to know. And that's something that, like, I'm not knowledgeable on that part of the process at all. And I want to have an appraiser come in to ask questions like that. But to me, like, it has to. Like, if they're going to make a big deal about a fake bedroom, how are they not going to make a big deal about, like, potentially $70,000 freaking project? Like,
and so, like, that's when it becomes, like, a real issue. So you as the home inspector, if you point out a crack, the person can say they want money off the house to fix it. They can come to an agreement. They can just not buy the house because they're worried. You can do whatever they want. Yeah. The real issue is when it's big enough that the house becomes not mortgageable anymore. And now everyone points fingers. No one knows what to do.
And that's like what I was saying. I spoke, but I'm not entirely sure. Is that because the appraiser came in and pointed it out that there was a foundation crack? Like, how would the mortgage company know?
It's not an appraiser. It's the mortgage company. A lot of the times through your home inspection.
So like an underwriter would get a hold of my report, see this big ass crack, and say we're not mortgaging it.
Yeah, so they'll do the same thing. They'll even do the same thing.
And that's a process. So you come in to repair it.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And it's also similar with insurance companies. Like, insurance company won't want to insure the house because
I'm throwing every
crack
I see, and I'm throwing every crack that I see, and the mortgage company's probably like, we got to fix it. You know, like I said, I throw it in just to show them. But I don't get involved in that second step. Like I am in communication with the clients as much as possible, but typically when they're so in the shit when it becomes the real estate process, unless they need me, I don't hear back in that situation. Sure. I typically only hear back from a client when they need a fence guy, or if they wanted to move forward with and make a repair, I'm calling you now, So that's when I'll hear back. So that's an interesting thing. That's a good point for realtors that are listing a house, and some of my realtors are pretty good, and they'll walk through a house. If they see a giant foundation crack, that might be really concerning, especially in an estate sale. They're selling grandma's house where nobody's been in it, doing the pre-work to get it corrected to avoid a hiccup down the road. If it's big enough. Because like I said, some of these are really, a lot of them are okay. A lot of them we can live with, but some of them are really big.
Yeah.
We're getting told that we're running out of time, and I know this is something we can go on about for a while.
Sure.
I just want you to just plug your information for the Instagram.
Yep.
And I'm sure we might even be able to come back again, run it back, and talk about the different products that you have, and
definitely,
tell some nightmare stories about the stuff you've seen, because this is great. Foundation's a huge part of our business.
There's a lot. We could go on forever
Absolutely.
About a bunch of different things, and a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
So basically, again, my name's Tyler Barron. It's Foundation Crack Repair. Our main office is on Main Street in Patchogue. You can reach us by phone, email, directly through Joe. I'm sure we'll start working together now.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys you're on Instagram?
Yeah, we're on Instagram.
Okay.
And it's Foundation Crack Repair.
Yeah, sweet.
And our phone number is 631-410-3388. You'll reach our office. You could always ask to speak to me. We come out and do any, a whole drainage and foundation inspections for free.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, man. Definitely give Tyler a call, because just from sitting down with you, I can tell you're a genuine dude, and you'll go do that free inspection, and it's not a scare tactic. I know you know what you're talking about. You're a solid dude, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much for coming on. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in again. Till next time, stay knowledgeable.